Right, our next speaker is Chris Griffin from Betable. Betable is a platform that allows games developers to implement real money gambling mechanics into their games in a licensed way, and also allows them to not worry about all the other things related to offering gambling services like KYC and other areas, payment solutions. Chris will talk about the intersection between different industries, more specifically the gambling industry and the casual games industry. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you. So I just want to start by kind of giving everyone a high-level picture of what the two spaces look like, social mobile gaming as well as online gambling. I think everyone kind of assumes that social mobile gaming are very big industries, but relative to traditional online gambling, they're actually relatively small. The traditional online gambling did about $32 billion in revenue last year. That doesn't include mobile, which is really in its infancy. We think has a lot of promise for growth going forward, and has already started to show that it is in fact a big opportunity for social mobile game developers as well as traditional online casinos. One thing that's very interesting and something that I've always looked at for the last 7 years that I've been in the real money space is that although revenue generated in traditional online gambling really dwarfs that in social and mobile, it's an industry that has very little innovation, if any. And I suppose that's not surprising when you actually look at the structure of the industry. It is an oligopoly protected by licenses, where you have very few operators who, as a result, also have very little competition. And the kind of outcome of that over the last several years has been a space where you have very few suppliers actually building the technology. The technology that's out there is typically commodity products. The other big problem is that the companies that are actually building the technology that's backing all these online gambling companies also happen to be building the games. And it's a very big stretch to call these companies game companies as someone from Casual Connect would think of a game company. They're not game developers as we would think of them. They have kind of always just cloned what they found on the casino floor that they've seen work, built kind of generic versions of those games, and then they either skin them or white label them to operators, and then those operators generate the revenue off them. The issue there is that the industry it really lacks the institutional knowledge of how to build games. It lacks the institutional knowledge of how to build really good scalable technology, and there really isn't the competition driving either of those things forward. And there's typically a bifurcation between those that have supplier or manufacturer licenses and those that have operating licenses. So you really kind of lose that kind of vertically integrated institutional knowledge of not only how to build the technology in the games, but also how to acquire players and monetize those games, retain the players, engage them, et cetera, et cetera. Which, as any social or mobile game developer knows, is really essential. You really need kind of all of those parts built into the content to really have a successful game. And when we looked at the space, we realized, well, not only is it very inefficient for all the kind of reasons that I outlined, but all the products in the space are commodities. And although these games generate a lot of revenue, anytime you have commodity products, there's really only two main ways that you can compete. You can either try to outspend your competitors on customer acquisition, or you can have lower fees. But in either case, your margin eventually goes away. And to give you you guys an idea of what I mean when I say commodity products, these are two different operators with two different apps on iOS. They are exactly the same games. They're basically both just white labeling the same games from a game supplier, and they've barely even made any differences in them. I think the backgrounds are slightly different shades of blue. That's kind of the extent of innovation at the moment in mobile for real money gaming, aside from the things that we're seeing built on Bettable. So when we look at this space, we realize that there's a huge amount of opportunity here in terms of revenue generation, and a huge opportunity to really disrupt the space, as long as you can get kind of these disruptive agents into the market. And when we really did kind of the side-by-side comparison of casino versus social mobile gaming, and when I say social mobile gaming, I don't just mean social casino, I mean social mobile gaming kind of writ large. When we look at the differences, it's a pretty stark contrast. Social mobile game developers have massive comparative advantages over traditional online casinos. They're great at building scalable technology. They understand how to build innovative game experiences. They understand how to build social and mobile social and viral context into their games. They understand mobile, and probably one of the biggest comparative advantages is that they already have an existing user base in addressable markets where it's legal to do online real money gambling. That's probably an order of magnitude or more larger than the entire traditional casino space. So when we look at those two spaces, we realize that, wow, if we can move the social mobile guys into the real money space, then that is an opportunity for just enormous disruption, not only in terms of social casino guys moving into the traditional casino space and taking market share away from incumbents, but also expanding the market by really innovating on the core game mechanics, inventing new game mechanics, inventing new game experiences that make these games much more fun and broadly appealing versus a slot machine where you're literally just watching a random number getting chosen for you. Which, by the way, is the newest game that you can play in online casinos, which is a 125-year-old game. So again, just to give you an idea of what innovation means in traditional casino, the newest game is 125 years old. What Bettable has done is really provided a way for social and mobile game developers to move into the real money space. But just because we provided this platform that enables that doesn't mean that developers are going to do it. So we have to developers need a good, compelling reason to actually want to move into real money. And what we found was that social mobile game developers, as I'm sure everyone here knows, have a very hard time monetizing their games. Typically, the unit economics for a social mobile game dictate that you need massive player scale to have a viable business in the space. And the kind of current condition of the space is one which we would consider in crisis. The unit economics are very low, and because there's so much competition, I'd say it's nearing perfect competition in social mobile gaming. Margins are becoming very, very thin. CPAs are becoming very close to LTVs for players in the social and mobile gaming space. So there is a very, very real need for new revenue opportunities for social mobile developers, which is exactly why we think real money is the perfect solution for them. Historically, what we've seen for a social mobile game, for a traditional online casino game, is ARPU in the neighborhood of $75 to $100 per player per month, versus about $1 for social. So obviously a very, very big delta there. This is not kind of marginal utility that we're bringing in terms of revenue to social mobile developers. This is really kind of a tectonic shift in terms of the ability to monetize a player in these kinds of games. And I think really where the really interesting story lies, and what I think is really kind of a harbinger for what we'll see in the gaming space, is the customer lifetime value number. When we look at customer lifetime value for a traditional online casino game, the player is worth anywhere between $1,500 and $1,800. And when you kind of look at that at a micro scale, you realize that it's kind of it's got this kind of naturally built-in forcing function for adoption. Because it's kind of a classic prisoner's dilemma. If your competitor is doing real money and you're not, and they can monetize their players 900 times better than you can over their lifetime, then they're going to, when they reinvest that money into CPAs, they're going to easily be able to outspend you on customer acquisition. And if you're not doing real money as well, you're going to have a very, very difficult time competing. So we think that real money, and we're already seeing it, real money will absolutely be a necessary component for game monetization for everyone in the future. It doesn't mean that it will take over virtual currency, virtual goods, et cetera, but it will be a necessary complementary part of the monetization of these games in order for developers to be competitive. And just to kind of drive the point home, when we look at what that kind of prisoner's dilemma means at a macro scale, then you realize that once enough developers start applying those unit economics to customer acquisition at scale, then eventually CPAs will rise above, and they're already almost there anyway, but they will rise above the LTV of a non-real money player. And once that happens, if you're not also doing real money, you just simply won't be able to afford to acquire players anymore. And obviously, getting into real money at the bottom of the cost curve is obviously makes a ton of sense economically, because then you can kind of acquire all the economics as the kind of CPAs rise over time. So developers have several different ways of getting into the real money space. The kind of lightest touch way is to be a brand, is to kind of do branded IP licensing. All you're doing in this case is supplying your brand to an operator, and they're skinning their games with your brand. So like Wheel of Fortune slots, for example, would be a good example of that. The economics on those types of deals are generally pretty pathetic. They're kind of single-digit percentages of the overall revenue that the game generates. Sometimes they're fractional percentages. You can be an affiliate where you're driving revenue, or rather where you're driving players to an online casino, or you can be a white label kind of super affiliate where you have a skinned site and you're driving traffic to that site. In our opinion, none of those options are good for developers, because it really marginalizes the developer. You go from being a game developer to just being a traffic source. I don't think any game developer is really interested in that kind of relationship. The fourth option you have is to get a license and become a fully licensed and regulated operator, which, speaking from experience, is maybe one of the most painful things you can ever go through. It took me several years to get my first license, cost millions of dollars, and that's kind of just the first thing that you have to do. Once you actually get the license, you actually have to be a regulated operator, which is fairly painful as well. The other alternative is that you can use Bettable. Bettable, as Ralph mentioned, is the only platform that lets any developer legally offer real money gambling and betting in their games and apps. Time to market using Bettable is less than 48 hours, and it is your game, your math, and you have kind of total control over the players and the experience, which is pretty revolutionary for the real money space. I can skip through this really quickly. I think you guys get the idea. Basically, we are a real money API. And we provide the entire back end for the game. So it's everything from, we host and operate the gambling code, we determine the results, we host and operate the player accounts, the house account, we do all the payments, security, fraud, compliance, risk mitigation, all the way down to customer support. So we're the entire real money back end plus all the supporting services for the games. Now, as a player, I just want to run through what the experience looks like really quickly from a player's perspective. So let's say I'm trying to play this game from the US, and I want to load up the real money version of this game. Bettable would actually detect where the players are and keep that player in a virtual currency environment, because he's not in a geography where he should be allowed to play. But if this player were in the UK, for example, we would detect that. If they don't already have an account, they would create a Bettable account. They would fund that account. As they're doing this, Bettable is doing all the KYC checks in the background to make sure that this player is who he says he is and should be allowed to play. And assuming that he does pass kind of all of the required fields, Then he auths into the game, Bettable disappears in the background, and now this player is in the real money experience of the game, and it's pretty seamless. From here on out, that developer only needs to auth into the game or any other game that's on Bettable's network, kind of like using Facebook Connect. So very, very seamless and simple for players. And then finally, I just kind of wanted to conclude with the performance that we're seeing with Bettable's games right now. The games that are on Bettable, and we have quite a few that are live, although we haven't publicly announced many of them, across the board we are seeing incredible performance. Actually, in some cases, it's actually much better than top performing casino games for real money. Engagement, which is the leading indicator for retention, is 10x that of the virtual currency versions of their games. And what's really compelling and exciting are the conversion rates. So typically for mobile, we're seeing about 1% free to paid conversion rates. We're already seeing north of 2.5% from free to real money conversion rates. And what's very, very compelling about the conversion rate is that this is not cannibalistic revenue, it's completely complementary. 80% of the people that are converting into real money players have never spent money in these games before, which is very exciting, obviously. So we obviously are very, very bullish on real money. We think that this is the future of games. We've built a platform that enables developers to really leverage their creativity and everything that they've learned in the social and mobile gaming spaces over the last several years to really transform what it means to play games for real money. And that's really what we're excited about. We're really trying to give game developers the ability to redefine what it is to play games with real money. So, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions from the audience for Chris?
Great, you guys made it easy.
Chris, I have a question for you. Like, right now, you guys are active in the UK only?
No.
No?
No.
What about other regulated markets like France and Spain, Italy? Do you have any plans there? Because obviously it's very difficult, I think, to acquire local licenses everywhere.
So in the jurisdictions that you mentioned, we're actually in the process of getting those licenses. We expect to have those soon.
Well, actually, two questions. One is that are you targeting only casino games or other casual games that you could somehow convert to real money? I don't know, Gamble and Cows and Farmville.
You absolutely can do that. So, as I mentioned, our platform is extremely flexible. When you build a game on it, you can, of course, build traditional casino games if you want. You can build abstractions of those games. We're basically giving you all the building blocks for the core mechanics of the games. We're not actually giving you kind of a white-labeled, fully built slot machine that you're just skinning. And you can also invent your own mechanics if you want. So kind of to your point, you could build kind of social versions of traditional casino games. You could build abstractions of those games, which could be, you know, Farmville, harvest mechanics in Farmville are kind of analogous mechanics to slot machines. So you could imagine buying the money tree, planting it, harvesting it is like pulling the lever, and then if the yield is good, you get real money. If it's bad, you get nothing, or maybe you get virtual currency as a consolation prize. And you could even invent totally new experiences kind of beyond that as well. And we're seeing kind of the full gambit in terms of inventiveness. We certainly have a lot of developers. Right now, they're going after the low-hanging fruit, which is building kind of social casino games, because that's pretty well understood. It's evergreen revenue. And it's very predictable revenue as well, and I think a lot of developers are going after that, especially in mobile right now, and trying to turn that into kind of their primary revenue platform for then innovating and building newer experiences off of that.
Right, and I'm assuming mechanics of a real money slots game and Slotomania or whatever could be different. Like, could I be at some risk if my game mechanics isn't set to accept real money gambling? Like, what if someone hits the jackpot?
Your virtual currency game, so if you have a real money and a virtual currency version of the same game, they have to have the same math. So it would have to have the real money math, assuming that your virtual currency game has higher than 100% RTP. You'd probably want to adjust that, otherwise you're going to be ROI negative on the game. So.
All right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, Chris, thank you very much.